Good morning, everyone. It is good to see you all. If you are new here, as Charlie said, my name's Andy. I'm one of the other ministers here. On our wall, we have our church values written down. I wonder what is your favourite value. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. Have you got a favourite? Anyone? Oh, for goodness sake! You must have a favourite. Then you'll shout at once. Include selflessly. Forgive swiftly. Love generously. Act justly, anyone? Brilliant. Yeah. I wonder why it is your favourite. That's maybe a harder question to answer. I wonder why it's your favourite. I don't know about you, but there's something about these values that kind of resonates deep within my spirit. It's kind of like they call me rather than I call them. They choose me rather than I choose them. But something deep within me calling me to be more like Jesus, who kind of embodies those values. We're back this morning in Matthew's Gospel. Matthew chapters 5 to 7 has become known as the Sermon on the Mount. There are 5 blocks of teaching in Matthew, and this is the first. And its common theme really is that it explores what it looks like to be a citizen of God's kingdom. What it looks like to live as a citizen of God's kingdom. And those 12 verses that Kat has just read to us have become known as the Beatitudes, from the Greek word beatus, which means blessed. Not Greek, Latin. Latin word, beatus, which means blessing. And it strikes me that those Beatitudes function a bit like our church values. They honour a certain way of being in the world, and those who kind of inhabit, I guess, those values. They're not ethical instruction. I guess they're more a kind of meditation on what it looks like when human beings find their hearts being shaped by God. When someone's heart is shaped by God, this is what it looks like. That's kind of what Jesus is saying here. This is what it looks like. I suspect most of us have heard that reading many, many times. We're kind of familiar with the words, but I guess if you hear them for the first time, and maybe if you're here this morning hearing them for the first time, they sound kind of odd, if we're honest. They're a far cry from, when we talk about blessed, we talk about a number of things. We talk about physical things. I'm blessed because I have my health, my house, my job, my family. Or there's often the kind of transactional blessing that we talk about. God will bless you if you do this. Preachers love that one. God will bless you if you read your Bible, if you have a daily quiet time, if you tithe, etc., etc., etc. You know that kind of thing, that God will bless you if. That sort of transactional blessing. But actually what Jesus is talking about here is neither of those things. It's more like, I guess, Psalm 1. Psalm 1 says this, blessed, or the start of it, blessed are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked. Their delight is in the law of the Lord. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. The blessed life here is tied up with that choice to set your heart on God. If you delight in the Lord, the psalmist is saying, then you are choosing to live the way that you are meant to live. You are choosing to live well. You are choosing to live within the stream of God's love. And what better way to live is there than that? To choose to live that way is to be blessed. That choice is a blessing. That's kind of what's going on here. When I was at Spurgeon's College many years ago, Alistair Campbell, who was our New Testament scholar, he taught us Matthew, or taught us to get a glimpse of Matthew, let's say. And when we came to this passage, he told us, actually, I prefer the term congratulations to the term blessed. I think that captures, he said, what's going on in this passage. Congratulations to those of you who have pure hearts. Congratulations to those of you who practice righteousness. You've got life sussed. God's got your back. You're living the way you are meant to live, as it were. Another term I quite like is flourishing. That sense that those who live in this way will flourish. Maybe not in the way the world defines flourishing, but you'll be like a tree in a well-watered spot, and you will live well. Does that make sense? You kind of get that, yeah? The blessing was all about living within God's flow, reflecting God's heart, inhabiting God's kingdom. God blesses us with mercy, and we become merciful. And that's just a good way to live, a godly way to live, and brings with it. It is blessed. It is blessed. That's what Jesus is saying. So the Beatitudes. I haven't got time to drill down into each of these terms, and maybe that's not actually helpful after all. You see, this is a list of examples. It's not a complete list. This is it. This is the blessed list. It's an illustration. It's the kind of things that are a blessed way of living. Jesus is kind of riffing on a theme, if you like. He's creating this broad picture of the kind of people that reflect God's heart out into the world. So we're going to spend a little bit of time to begin with the first one. We're going to linger here for a while and then pick up a couple of the other ones. I wonder what Jesus saw in the faces of the crowd when he stood up to preach. Probably he saw the tired eyes, the weary faces of those who were working their fingers to the bone, trying to earn a living to feed their family. Sometimes succeeding, oftentimes probably going to bed hungry. He saw those working for absentee landlords who would cream off a profit and pay a pittance. He saw orphans and widows who had known grief and uncertainty and had few places to turn. His eyes fixed on the pain of those who were sick, the lame, forced to live on the margins of Jewish society. He gazed upon the downtrodden and the disheartened and those who felt just hopeless, helpless. These are the poor in spirit. Poverty of spirit is what happens when life locks the stuffing out of you, and yet still you hope in God, even if you are hanging on by fingertips, desperately just clinging on. That's who Jesus saw. That's who Jesus addressed. It wasn't some theoretical group of people. It were the people in front of him, with their pain, with their struggle. Blessed are you, Jesus said. Blessed are you. And he uses words and he uses terms that they would have recognized. Because he's using words and he's using images from the prophets, from their prophets, from Isaiah especially. This is salvation language. It is good news for the poor language. It is gospel language. It's the promise of God coming to set his people free, coming to establish the reign and the rule of God on earth as it is in heaven. It's the language of the poor being fed, and the worker enjoying the fruit of his labor, and the mourners being comforted, and the righteous being filled, and the humble poor inheriting the earth. Jesus didn't invent the idea. It's all there. It's all there in Israel's scriptures. It's shalom language, peace on earth language, is the language of blessing. And these promises are for the poor in spirit, for those who are bruised and beaten up by life and its circumstances, for those who feel forgotten and ignored. It's for those who queue in line at the food bank. It's for those waiting long months for urgent surgery. It's for those of us who wrestle with our mental health and our physical health. It's for those who cower in the shelters waiting for the bombs to fall. It is those fleeing violent partners. It is for those who set out to cross the channel in makeshift dinghies because home is a frightening place to be. Home is not safe. It's for those of us, all of us, who've been traumatized by suffering. It is for those of us who feel lost. For those of us who've come to the end of our resources and who know that we cannot sustain hope and purpose in our own strength. Blessed are you when God is your only hope, for you will find a home in God's heaven. Blessed are you because God has not forgotten you. He has not abandoned you. Never think that God has forgotten you, or that God has abandoned you. God has not forgotten you. These words tell me that. But brothers and sisters, underlying the Beatitudes is the reality that the world is broken. Human society is broken. You don't need me to remind you of that. You don't need me to spell that out. That video, those pictures that we saw earlier did that pretty well. You don't need to mourn if there is no pain. You don't need to make peace if there is no conflict. You don't need to seek righteousness if it is not missing. And you don't need to endure persecution unless the world has gone nuts. I know that many of you use the Lectio 365 app to help with your part of your daily prayer life. Well, blessed are you if you do that. It's a real blessing, isn't it? For those of you who use it. A few days ago, this was one of the prayers. Lord, I recognize a relentless restlessness within my soul, calling me onwards, upwards, and inwards to yourself. And so I set my heart upon pilgrimage today, my feet on the road, and my eyes upon you. And as I've been reflecting on these words from Matthew, from Jesus this morning, I've sensed that same restlessness in my spirit. That same invitation to journey deeper with God. And I suspect these Beatitudes are part of that journey. They invite us to see our lives in a fresh way, to understand maybe our lives in a fresh way. They invite us to ponder anew, afresh, where our heart truly is. It's good we're reading at the start of Lent, because that fits with what Lent is all about, really. But more than that, they invite us to journey onwards, upwards and inwards to the broken heart of God. They urge us to embrace the strangeness of God, so that our hearts may echo the heartbeat of God. We all have our favourite value that kind of reaches out to us. And as I've pondered the Beatitudes this week, there are two particular, I sense, calling me, and maybe calling us, inviting us. The first is this one, the call to be merciful. The merciful are those who show kindness and compassion to others, and maybe particularly to the poor in spirit. It's easy for me to stand up here and say to you that God has not forgotten you. I can do it. It's easy. Perhaps it's harder for us to show them that God has not forgotten them. Words are easy. Do you know someone who's suffering badly at this time? Someone who's broken, someone who's hanging on by fingertips. How can you stand with them? Notice what I said, stand with them, not fix them. Too often we try and fix people rather than simply journeying with them. I think these words invite us to journey. How can you simply stand with them and support them and listen to them and simply be there for the long haul? Ministering the mercy of God. We're called, John's reminded us, we're called for the long haul, not the short haul. When I left university, I was unemployed for a few months. I spent so long when I was in my final year prevaricating over what I wanted to do that I missed the whole round of graduate recruitment. Those of you who know me well won't be surprised by that. And I ended up unemployed. And I remember one day seeing an advert. I can't remember what was being advertised, but the advert was trying to convince us that this was a great deal. And it said these words, anyone can afford it. Anyone can afford it. Well, everyone but me, it felt like. So I was a no one. And if I was a someone, I didn't matter. I guess the advert caught me at a bad time and it hit me hard. And at that point, I understood how and why unemployment can be so dehumanizing and so demotivating. And job centres are just depressing, particularly in the 80s. I don't know if they're any better now, but just depressing. But I was lucky. I was surrounded by a whole group of people who showed me that I did matter and that I wasn't forgotten and that they were there for me for the long haul. And they kept me going. Blessed are the merciful, for they are close to the heart of God, where mercy is available for all. And quickly, we're running late, but quickly, the second beatitude was about those who mourn. when I was younger, much, this was going back to the 80s as well, there was a worship song that the church I was in sung quite regularly, actually. It went like this. Look around you, can you see? Times are troubled. People grieve. See the violence, feel the hardness. All my people weep with me. Anyone else remember that one? Mark does, certainly. Brilliant. God weeps at the brokenness of the world. God weeps over Ukraine. God weeps over the job centres. God weeps with those who suffer. And God invites us to weep too, to allow our hearts to be broken, to learn to lament, to cry out to God. Oh God, do not let your world hurt this way forever. How long, O Lord? O Lord, have mercy. We were kind of doing that earlier in the service, weren't we? I didn't know Charlie was going to do that. Those images, when you reflected on those images in the quiet, did you hear the tears of God? The cry of God over the pain of the world. We need songs that could help us lament together. There you go, John, a little retirement project for you. You've probably got them all. You've probably got some already, certainly. Songs that help us lament. Of course, the Bible has songs. They're in the Psalms. And I've decided on a bit of a Lent project for myself. I'm not great at giving things up for Lent, but it is good sometimes to take on something. So what I'm going to try and do during Lent, I'm a bit late to the party as always, but I'm going to choose 6 of the Psalms of Lament, and I'm going to pray one of them each day for the rest of Lent in solidarity with God and with the broken world, and to see where that takes me. And if you're welcome to join me. Love to have you along. And if you'd like to, drop me a line and I'll send you the list of 6 Psalms, or I'll get Emma to put them in the notice sheet for next week. How long, O Lord? How long? Blessed are those who mourn, whose hearts are broken by the pain of the world. For God will surely bring comfort. And there's so much more to say. But we need to finish now. As we finish, I wonder which of those Beatitudes is calling to you, calling you onwards and upwards into the broken heart of God. Maybe it's the call to mourn. Maybe it's the call to mercy. Maybe it's one of the others that, as I've spoken this morning, has just resonated deep in your spirit. But God is calling us, inviting us to embrace the brokenness of the world, calling us to the joy of these strange blessings that God has for all of us, knowing that this is the way that God will bring healing to the world.